Since the mid-90s, 3D accelerator cards have excited me more than any other piece of technology. GPUs back then were very different to how we perceive them today, with cards such as the 3DFX Voodoo series and the Rendition Verite being the talk of the town. Back then, there was a lot of changes in the industry, of course. The Sony PlayStation and other 3D-capable consoles were really starting to make a name for themselves, and focusing on the PlayStation just for a second, it had a lot of custom hardware to help it push triangles. Well, in the case of the Saturn, it was a little bit different as it focused on quads, and its 3D setup was weird, dude. But moving on, ever since then, my love of graphics cards has just continued, and I think now, as we are kind of ending 2021, I have to say that the GPUs which are available, the RX 1000 series from AMD and Nvidia's RTX 30 series, have been really cool. And not too long from now, we're also going to have, of course, Intel's GPUs too, and they are shaping up to be really interesting. Unfortunately, of course, the shortages have absolutely plagued us for the last 12 months, but this is perhaps one of the reasons that I am so interested in next year, because not only are we going to see tons of new hardware launch, such as Intel's Alchemist series, RTX 40 and RDNA 3, but also shortages should start to alleviate. So with that said, I wanted to, in this video, focus on several things that I've been hearing. Predominantly, this is going to focus on Intel as well as Nvidia. And yeah, I guess the first thing to do is to get started, right after this message from the sponsor. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they've an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also, of course, sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. Intel's Arc series will debut with Alchemist. Up until recently, of course, we've been calling it DG2. Intel technically isn't new to graphics. Indeed, iGPUs have been a thing with Intel since seemingly the Big Bang, but Alchemist is a very different beast. It's been already confirmed by Intel that Alchemist will debut next year, and they've also shown off a roadmap with several other architectures. We'll get to those in a moment. Alchemist will be feature-rich, or more accurately, I suppose, have feature parity with their rivals over at Team Red and Team Green. So it will feature stuff like hardware-based ray tracing, mesh shading, variable rate shading, and perhaps one of the most exciting things is Intel XESS. XESS is technically a DLSS competitor. In other words, it will upsample games from a lower resolution to a higher resolution, and it does use kind of neural network machine learning to do this, but it is very different to DLSS in one way, and that it will work on both GeForce and AMD GPUs, or to put it another way, Intel's competition. However, it will benefit itself running on Alchemist because it can take advantage of the native instructions inside that architecture. Naturally, this will also mean it can run on older Intel architectures as well, but again, it will still be faster running on Intel's more modern architecture, which we will see in Alchemist. I'm actually hearing that the ray tracing performance is reasonably competitive with Alchemist, but performance targets in traditional rasterizations, I've gone over this multiple times, haven't really changed. For desktop, it seems it's RTX 3060 Ti on the lower end, and in best case scenario, possibly the 3070 Ti. Generally though, as I said many months ago when I broke it, RTX 3070 is the performance that we're going to be seeing on average. Intel do want to be competitive in terms of pricing, but for desktop, we'll get into mobile in just a moment, there will be 3 SKUs available: 512, 384, and finally 128 execution units. One of my sources told me that 128 is not correct and it's actually 256, and 128 is solely for mobile. But another one has told me, so a second source has told me, that there's 4 SKUs, 512, 384, 256, and 128. Yep, reading all those numbers isn't getting old. Personally though, I'm leaning towards the original set of numbers, 512, 384, and 128 for now, and then I suspect that Intel will introduce 256 later down the road. But yeah, mobile seems to be the focus of Intel right now. And if you've been watching the channel for any length of time, you'll know that I already put out a video to discuss Intel's mobile first strategy. Basically that they would be releasing the G2, or as it's known, Alchemist now, first on mobile, and then we would see it released later on in desktop. And there have been other sources since then that seems to be confirming that, well, the desktop iteration will launch later, including WCCF Tech, of course. We're discussing this quite recently as well. And it makes sense from several perspectives, but the main one is that Intel really want to focus on Nvidia's lunch money. And when you think about it, the mobile ecosystem for Nvidia has been extremely lucrative, but it also represents an area which Intel can compete in extremely well across multiple different fronts. The laptop market isn't just a small market for gaming anymore, and GPUs of course can be used for a plethora of things, including 3D acceleration for CAD applications, or Blender, even Adobe Photoshop and Premiere of course use it, not to mention stuff such as machine learning. So Intel offering an Intel/Intel kit to laptop vendors and then giving them MDF or marketing development funds and other deals makes sense, and seems to be, well, the direction Intel have been going. I'm hearing this from multiple sources at this point, and while I don't think Nvidia equals screwed, Nvidia will be fighting hard tooth and nail off the market. I've spoken to a few people within the industry. Believe me, they are very well connected and have been pretty damn accurate in the past. And it seems to be the case that this is the plan more than ever. Intel know it will have a harder time breaking into the discrete GPU market. Marketing, for example, in discrete is something that Nvidia have done extremely well. But laptops, especially given Intel's brand recognition, Intel feels it can really hurt Nvidia here. Now, I'm actually interested to hear your opinions on this, guys, because, you know, it's really interesting because I'm seeing a ton of Intel ads here in the UK. I mean, I'm shocking you perhaps that I live in the UK, but yeah, like going to the gym, I'm hearing them on YouTube, just pretty much anything. I'm seeing Intel focused ads for, you know, different vendors, but it all seems to be focused around Intel branding. And I'm curious to hear whether you guys, especially if you're in different countries, like what your experience here is. Like, are you guys noticing more ads, especially on television? I don't really watch much TV in the UK, honestly. I, you know, mostly watch stuff through Netflix or Amazon or whatever. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. Are you hearing more Intel marketing push towards mobile laptops? Just interested. Ultimately, it'll be a very interesting situation if Nvidia ends up buying ARM. As of the time I'm recording this, the approval of the deal is being debated amongst those in charge. And if Nvidia does buy ARM, we could see a very different ecosystem. Nvidia pushing a very different class of device. I've already had an exclusive where I was discussing Nvidia's internal testing with an ARM-powered CPU and with GeForce GPUs with ray tracing running. I believe it was a Call of Duty game that was being tested here, but I can't remember 100%. I'll try to remember to link that video in the description. I also feel it would be wrong for me not to mention that AMD, of course, also want a piece of the lunch money from Nvidia, and naturally we have already seen a great deal of success of the RX 6000 series. One of the benefits of RDNA 2 is it does scale rather well across different power envelopes. I mean, for goodness sake, it's going essentially a custom variant anyway into a cell phone. So I do suspect that AMD will continue to push and push and push this with evolution in smart technology, or sorry, smart shift technology. Rather interesting too, we've also seen Robert Halleck mention that power is something that they are going to really focus on processors. He gave a couple of examples in the Zen 5-year video where, for example, they will be able to much better disable cores if there's not like a whole like load of processing going on, or multi-thread processing. So it'll be very interesting to see how AMD continues to evolve that technology and how it will focus on GPUs and power efficiency. I remember that one of the key reasons RDNA 2 was a lot more power efficient, there were several reasons actually. One was that they got a lot of the engineers involved in the Zen 2 and Zen 3 engineering, especially again when it comes to that power efficiency, that type of thing. They actually helped the Radeon Technologies group, well, yeah, with power efficiency. They weren't showing them pizza recipes. But yeah, it was that, plus of course working alongside Sony and Microsoft. To my understanding, Sony in particular had a hand here because of the high clock demands of the PlayStation 5. Obviously the designs between Microsoft and Sony were rather different, with Microsoft wanting a wider design because they were focused on compute and T-flops, whereas Sony just wanted data throughput. So having a high clock frequency was of paramount importance, and obviously consoles have a very tight power envelope, so it'll be very interesting to see how this spurs future designs, especially given of course that we're hearing rumours about, you know, the Pro consoles, and I'll be doing a video on that in a not too distant future. So let's focus just for a moment on Intel. Now the RTX 4090 is said to be at least 2 times faster than the RTX 3090. Indeed, I'm even hearing that that's quite conservative and it's 2.4 times, but I'm going to focus just on 2 times because it's really easy just to do maths in your head with that. But yeah, the DG2 range, or Alchemist, is going to launch, you know, kind of late Q1, early Q2, I'm hearing, for desktop. Let's just say, you know, early Q2 for the sake of this video. So when you think about it, just logically, if it has an RTX 3070 performance target, that means that an RTX 4060, which, you know, the release date apparently for the RTX 40 series is going to be late Q3, early Q4. Those are the rumours anyway. We've seen them from Grayman, Copy7, and I've been hearing similar. It doesn't exactly take a genius to figure out that Intel's, you know, highest end SKU is going to get absolutely ruffle stomped by Lovelace and of course RDNA 3. So for a while now, I have been speculating that Intel's roadmap is probably going to be pretty rapid in terms of its execution, with Alchemist being replaced rather snappily with a different architecture. And now I'm actually hearing that this is the case from one of my sources. I've been told that currently Intel are considering releasing its next architecture between 6 and 8 months, with the target release date therefore being late 2022 or early 2023. So this would be between 1 and 2 quarters after AMD or Nvidia launch their stuff, again depending on exact timescales and releases, assuming there's no slowdowns. As you can see from this Intel GPU roadmap, Alchemist is followed by Battlemage, Celestial, and then finally Druid. Also notice something interesting here, Intel Xe Next architecture with Druid. Now I've heard whispers that the first 3 GPU architectures, so Alchemist to Celestial, are essentially evolutions of the same idea architecture, but Druid is a major redesign of this architecture. For your FYI, I'm also hearing a little bit similar in terms of RDNA 3 and RDNA 4. So RDNA 1 to RDNA 2 does have some pretty big changes. Obviously, we have additional features like ray tracing and so on, but fundamentally, the designs are not totally different, right? And then RDNA 3 again has some major changes, especially with how WGPs are designed, but the real change seems to be RDNA 4. I'm hearing that there are some massive changes between RDNA 3 and RDNA 4. I can't get anything super specific at the moment, but I'm hearing that it's quite a radical shift. It's basically just, yeah, it's completely a new architecture, essentially. Focusing a little bit longer on Nvidia though, I've already spoke at length about the performance targets, and there have been a number of leaks from folks such as Copy7 Kimmy, myself, Grayman regarding these specifications. It's fair to say that in terms of power consumption though, Lovelace and RDNA 3 will be, well, let's just say hungry hippos. And one of the reasons of course is that you do need to squeeze as much juice as possible just to compete with one another. It'll be really interesting actually to see how they compete in terms of mobile with that regard, but whatever. But what is quite interesting though is that I'm being told that DLSS 3 is actually being considered for RTX 40 launch. We'll get into the specifics in a moment. Now, as of the time I'm recording this, I do want to stress that this information, of course, like anything here, could be incorrect. But interestingly, I've had two sources. One person told me that it's almost certainly true, and another one pretty much insinuating that my first source is right. Now, what I don't know is if DLSS 3 will work on RTX 20 or RTX 30 cards. So, in other words, well, whether it will be exclusive. My suspicion is that it probably won't be, but maybe it won't get such a speed up. Again, I'm not 100% certain on that, and it will be very interesting to see how Nvidia handles that. But speaking about DLSS 2 and 3, well, DLSS 2 has had numerous enhancements, of course, especially over DLSS 1, but we've also seen DLSS 2 now be much easier to implement into games. It even supports Linux and so on. And naturally, this also comes down to things such as the quality. And naturally, this does make sense, given, well, that's what machine learning does. It gets better and better and better at a specific task. So what I'm told about DLSS 3 is quality does seem to have improved considerably, but the big focus was apparently on ray tracing performance. I don't have details yet on how this is achieved. I'm trying to do some more digging. Perhaps a better question is, again, will this be possible on the Lovelace architecture? I'm hearing that there are some pretty big changes coming up for Nvidia in ray tracing in terms of the just overall way that ray tracing is handled, although at the moment it's still kind of debated amongst a couple of the people I'm speaking to whether this is Lovelace or Hopper, although it does seem to be insinuated it's starting with Lovelace that these major changes. And if you've been watching the channel a couple of, maybe about just under a week ago, I had another video on the channel where I was discussing, well, basically Nvidia kind of adopting a TikTok model. Now, to be fair, Nvidia have kind of done that in the past. Like, if you remember back to the, what was it, GTX 8800? Yeah, what was it, 88? No, 8800 GTX, you know, those kind of series of cards. And then how we had the 9000 series and so on and so on. They were, to a degree, kind of evolutions of one another. You could even somewhat argue that Maxwell to Pascal, okay, I wouldn't really call that like a refresh. There was some significant architecture differences, but you kind of get my point, right? It's really interesting to think what this would mean, though, for Nvidia going forward, because apparently they're going to really embrace this model and essentially try to get out like a refresh and then a new architecture, and they're going to be doubling down on this apparently moving forward. So I'm very curious to see how Nvidia kind of embrace this, given they will be facing a ton of competition. Now, while Intel definitely are the new kids on the block, as I mentioned a moment ago, they're going to be pushing the mobile GPUs heavily. And the thing about Intel is that they have a lot of money. You know what, I'll just let you guys Google the market cap of Intel and Nvidia and then do the same for AMD. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so impressed that AMD are competing with these guys. But yeah, it's fair to say that the funds that Intel actually has available to it, it's profound. And this is one of the reasons I think Intel, if they choose to compete in the, in the segment, they will eventually do extremely well. It's just if they can keep the consistency. To be fair to Intel, they seem to be much better at the moment in management. Raja Koduri seems to have a very clear vision with Intel graphics. Obviously now he's the head honcho. I actually heard that Intel were planning, or at least Raja was kind of hoping to really undercut the competition in terms of GPU pricing. The thing is now, because he's essentially responsible for the P&L, the profit and loss over at Intel graphics, he also has to be a little bit more mindful of that, perhaps than what he had to do before. So it'll be really curious to see what the pricing of Intel's products is going to end up being. I had heard it could be like $300 for essentially an RTX 3070-ish card. However, that was early on, and with all of the stuff that's happening in the market, I wouldn't be surprised if that price does creep up a little bit. But then again, he's also going to be releasing these products late, well, okay, not late next year, but next year, which is going to be late in the product cycle of, well, AMD and Nvidia's GPUs. So again, pricing is going to really matter here. Just briefly closing things out though, the feather in the cap at the moment for Nvidia is definitely ray tracing performance and DLSS. DLSS is going to find a competitor with XESS, and to be fair to AMD, FSR is doing extremely well right now. Although, honestly, you can make a very good argument that while they all are upsampling technology, they don't really necessarily compete with one another in the traditional sense. And of course, one of the benefits of FSR, just for example, is that it works well on consoles as well. So it'll be interesting to me how all of this plays out, especially XESS and DLSS, to see how both of these are embraced by developers, and more specifically, what type of incentives and how easy it is to be implemented into game engines. Currently, there's precious little about XESS from Intel in terms of how it's implemented, but of course, to be fair, it's not actually been released. And despite the fact that DLSS was kind of difficult initially, it's now doing very well in the marketplace. The adoption has been really good, and we're now starting to see it implemented into tons of games. The hilariously titled Fist, or whatever it's called. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, as of the time I'm recording this, is going to be getting an update early next week, I think, which is going to improve the DLSS quality. It's going to shift from version 1 to version 2 point whatever. Even Rise of the Tomb Raider is getting a DLSS update, which will be quite interesting anyway for folks who maybe have like a mobile RTX 2060 or 3060, something around there. Maybe you get a few extra frames, or even if you have like an RTX 2060 and maybe you want to kind of play at ultra high resolutions, I might do some testing on that just for fun. With that said, thank you very much for checking out the video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.